Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host, Mark Philpott, and on today's show, I have another couple of great guests for you. Seems to me that more and more younger people are choosing the life of travelling the world and becoming digital nomads. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking to a couple of young Australians who have chosen that particular lifestyle as they venture out there and try and make a sustainable living of being travellers on the road. Let's go and meet Chris and Hayley from Brisbane, Australia. So, Chris and Hayley, youre, and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mark.
Had to get their little Kiwi part in there because we're going to be talking a lot about New Zealand today. And tell us, whereabouts in the world are you chatting to us from today?
We are in Plovdiv, Bulgaria.
Plovdiv, Bulgaria, wow. It
Don't
must
worry.
be, what, minus 30 degrees or something, is it?
It's actually all right. It's kind of a little microclimate here, but it's not a place that we had heard of before we came either.
Yeah, for us Queenslanders, it's pretty cold.
I was going to say half of Australia's on fire at the moment, and you've probably had word from back home that it's a fairly dire situation so early in the summer season. So
Yes.
a lot of people are suffering, so we're going to send out a bit of a condolence to all those people that are suffering in Australia due to the bushfires, and also to the hard work that the emergency fire brigades and everybody else involved puts into to do that. Now, while we're on the whole theme of dedications, what I like to ask my guests to do is to actually dedicate the episode to someone special in their lives. So who would you like to dedicate this episode to today?
Ooh. Oh, I have a good idea. Our friend Grace, first of all, because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but by the time the show comes out, I think it's okay. She's pregnant at the moment, but also because she has put in some wonderful efforts to help the people fighting the bushfires.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's very applicable then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Grace, this is for you, and a lovely dedication from Chris and Hayley. And the important thing is that Grace is going to be able to listen to this after the baby's born as well, and have this as a long-lasting memory. So there we go. You can dedicate the show to her.
Famous
Now,
baby.
we're going to be talking to you guys about traveling, and also about digital nomads and all the rest of it. Before we get there, how did your story start? What made you guys decide to change your lives, pack up, head off out of Brisbane, and become digital nomads?
Well, I think it was a curiosity with traveling. Hayley had traveled a lot of her life living overseas, and I'd never really been away from home for more than 2 weeks. And we were in jobs that weren't really suited to travel life, and we were trying to organise trips to Europe and things like that. And living in Australia, you don't get a lot of time off, and our schedules weren't really aligning to do a long-term trip, which we really wanted to do. So we just had the idea one day at the Ipswich races. We probably had a few too many shandies while we were there, and decided to quit our jobs and go travelling. And 6 months later, that's what we did.
So what were you both doing in the corporate world?
I was a bid coordinator, which meant I organised proposals to win engineering contracts.
And I used to work in sales, so I would my busiest times of year would be those Christmas holidays, and when Hayley would have time off, I would be working hard. So that's why our schedules didn't align too well.
Understandably so. Now, a lot of my listeners to the show, they're really interested in people like you who have changed their lives in a significant way. What would have been some of the major challenges that you faced about making that decision to change your lives, and how long did it actually take you to come up with that decision to, okay, we're going to get out of here and we're going to go and travel the world?
It's something, like Chris said, we had been talking about and never found a solution. And I think it was actually us getting engaged and trying to plan our honeymoon, and then realizing what we actually wanted to do, we couldn't feasibly do with how our lives were structured at the time. And that was the impetus. I think the biggest challenge once we did make the decision, like, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to make it happen, and we're really excited. For me, the biggest challenge was actually confronting my parents who
Right.
want me to get married and buy a home and settle down and have a family, because that's what their understanding of happiness and security is. Whereas I maybe want that in the future, but right now I'm really excited about travel and exploring the world.
So was it a hard sell? Did you have to really, was there some hard fought battles in terms of those conversations with your parents to get them to accept the decision that you made, or did they actually accept the decision?
Yeah, they accepted it. They're happy for me. They don't really understand my life choices, I think, and they still do want me to settle down. And my mum, I think she didn't acknowledge that I was going away for such a long time until the day we were leaving, and she cried the whole day. But having said that, we talk all the time, and they're happy for me and they're excited about what we're doing with our lives.
How long did it take them to accept Chris?
They love him more than they love me.
Oh, oh! I don't want to open a can of worms there. So
No, Chris is the favourite.
we probably need to move on. So Chris, how about you? How was it for you when you kind of you two were just sitting down discussing this over a few shandies, as Australians do, with the life-changing decisions? Was it an easy decision for you to make, and how did your family take it on board?
Yeah, I think for me, it was a little bit easier because I was so excited at the time, but I guess I didn't understand what it meant in the long run. Like I said, I'd never really traveled too much in my life, so being away from home and comforts for a long period of time was quite new to me. And my parents were very supportive. Like I remember speaking to my dad especially, and he was just like, "Do it." Like I think I saw a theme of speaking to some older people, and maybe they had missed out on opportunities in their life that they didn't have the courage to take. And they were just like, just do it, just go for it, like really make the most of this time. You're young, you don't have commitments, so you may as well do it now while you can.
Hayley, in what I just listened to Chris there and what you guys have already shared with me, it sounds like you were the one that's had more travel experience prior to you and Chris taking off. So what was Chris like when he first got out there and started traveling as a newbie on the road?
He was a natural. He's a better traveler than I am. He's so resilient, and he does our booking of things, which actually surprised me because I'm normally the itinerary maker and spreadsheet keeper. But because I'm too indecisive, Chris is able to lock things in, and he's just taken to it like a duck to water, organizing meetups with people so that we can make friends in new areas, and learning a new language, and just throwing himself into the deep end.
Yeah, fantastic. There you go, Chris. That's a great rap from your wife, mate.
Yeah, I just got a few goosebumps. It's the first nice thing she said to me.
I was going to say, haven't you heard that before, that story?
That one? Yeah, well, I scripted it for her before this conversation, so...
Look, we're gonna chat about a whole lot of stuff today, from living intentionally and sustainably to a van trip through New Zealand. And I hear also, Chris, that you love driving on winding roads and up mountain roads. That's one of your favourite things. But also we're going to talk about some of the stories of struggles and triumph, and let's hear some of those things that have happened. But let's start off in my favourite country, where I was born, and I'm a very proud New Zealander who's currently residing in Australia, like half the rest of the country. But what made you decide to go and live in a van in New Zealand?
Well, I am half Kiwi myself, so I'm a proud half breed. My dad's from Hawke's Bay, and
Okay.
well, I was living there before Chris and I started dating, and that's where we rekindled our romance as adults, because we went to school together, so we knew each other from when we were very young. And then when I was living in New Zealand, that's where we met up again. And we love the culture, we love the scenery, just everything about New Zealand is amazing, and the ultimate freedom that living in a van gives you in a country that makes it so accessible is the dream, I think.
Yeah, I think it is
Yeah.
quite high on a lot of people's bucket lists, and I listened to a few podcasts about the subject, and we'd spoken about van life because it had become such a trending topic, and looking into it, it really made sense for us to get the most out of seeing such an amazing country that just driving down the road is an experience in
Do you
itself.
think it's possibly the best way to see New Zealand?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we recommend it to everyone. Like anyone who speaks about seeing New Zealand, like when you're traveling, you talk about Australia and New Zealand, and they're put on this pedestal as these amazing countries. And I guess not a lot of people have the opportunity to see them because they're so far away from everywhere else. But we definitely recommend New Zealand over Australia. I'm sorry to say to Australians, and me being Australian, that may be a bit hard to swallow, but as far as countries go in the world, New Zealand's definitely one of our favourites.
Now, when you set out on this journey, you decided at that time that you wanted to become digital nomads. Is that correct? Did you have that plan in your head before you left?
It was absolutely in my head, but one of the challenges we experienced on this trip was that we weren't really on the same page with our expectations and how we envisioned the year working out for us. I think because I had done so much travel, I thought that this year was our opportunity to create a new life. But to create a new life, yes, we had freedom, but you also need to put the work into it. And we were traveling so fast that we didn't create that opportunity to be digital nomads. And also, we were in South America for a large chunk, and the internet really doesn't serve the digital nomad purpose. Whereas Chris hadn't done that much travel and he wanted to be as adventurous as possible. And so after a few months, we realized we weren't aligning in our travel values, and that's something we had to fix before we started this digital nomad life.
Understandable. We are going to talk about your weekly budget meetings later on because I find that quite a fascinating thing between couples, but we'll get there. Let's stay on New Zealand for the moment. I want to let you know, Hayley, that I have a mate in New Zealand who's actually responsible for all of the public toilets throughout the country. And
Okay.
I hear you have a bit of a gripe about what time they close every day. Is that right?
It's not that I have a gripe. I think it's the New Zealand public who should have a gripe with how I have to deal with them closing.
Okay, so you highly recommend that they don't close their doors at 5 o'clock and they let vanners into a bit later on. Is that right?
Well, maybe we should just be better prepared and realize that the local park is not a freedom camping spot.
So, van life in New Zealand, you started from the beginning, you got yourself a van. How was that process? What did you do to get the right kind of vehicle and how did you purchase it?
That was a process. We had made the decision to buy a van, and only having 6 weeks there, it was kind of a risk, but we had looked into renting a van for the whole time, and for that same price, you could buy a pretty decent van, in inverted commas, for what we needed anyway. We had we flew into Christchurch and we'd only booked 2 nights accommodation, and within those 3 days we had scheduled 4 van viewings within, what's the park called?
Hagley Park.
Within Hagley Park. And
Right.
yeah, there are a lot of tourists trying to sell their van before they leave, so you can really pick up a good deal if this is how you want to do it. And we scheduled the 4 viewings, we had a look, we did the test drives, we had set ourselves some mandatory questions we had to try and ask people, and we did it in a way where we tried to separate the couple to try and get the correct information, because when you ask about the drivability of the van, they're always going to tell you it's pretty good even though it may not be. And yeah, we made a decision within a couple of days, which I was surprised about, and we bought the van. And New Zealand makes it so easy just to transfer ownership and get your insurance, and yeah, it was just a bit of a breeze, and we were quite surprised once we spent that first night in the van of how quickly and exciting it was.
Yeah.
And have you got a mechanical background? So do you know what you're looking for when you're buying a vehicle like that?
Absolutely not.
Not at
Neither
all.
of us knew what we were doing, so we were Googling the types of questions to ask to make sure that you make a smart purchase. And we were standing in the park quizzing each other on the questions to ask during the van inspections. But what I was looking for most was functional storage and a good kitchen, and for me, being able to physically transfer the bed into seats, things like that, just to give you ease of livability, I guess.
So that's a good point, because a lot of people who are listening and want to take on a challenge like this, they kind of think, well, I don't have the mechanical background. I could be getting sold something that's a bit of a rabbit here, and therefore the whole holiday falls over. But as you say, there's a lot of resources online. There's plenty of YouTube videos that you can watch about people that have gone and done this sort of stuff. So it's good that Dr. Google helped out in that area as well. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing too is there's a lot of places that will do a pre-selling check as well. So we made sure we got one of those at is it AA?
AA.
AA, and that really helped because they actually discovered that the brake pads were quite worn, and we got a little bit more money off the price. So that really helped with our not so mechanically minded minds.
I just want to translate for everybody there what Chris just said. AA in New Zealand is not Alcohol Anonymous. It's actually the roadside assistance organisation that helps you when you either break down or got anything wrong with your car and stuff. So that's AA in New Zealand. You started off in Christchurch. What time of the year did you do this?
It was right at the end of January, so perfect weather, really. Although it was still too cold for us to swim in the South Island, so our plan was, okay, we live in a van, we don't have a shower, we'll just swim in the ocean and in lakes, and that's how we'll bathe. But it being so cold in the South Island, we went a few days at a time without showering.
You haven't come across the Wim Hof method yet?
Oh, we were mindful of it, actually, because there was one time in Cape Farewell where I said, I don't care how cold it is, I am getting in the water. And then we ended up swimming with seals, so it worked to our advantage.
And that's the most northern point in New Zealand, isn't it?
That's the most northern point of the South
Island. Okay. So you tried to get a bit of warm water as far north as you could.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's probably like the closest point to Queensland, so we thought, mate, this might work, but it's still cold. Yeah.
So you headed out of Christchurch. Which way did you go from there?
Our first stop was Kaikoura, so it's a pretty magnificent place, and it's probably pretty well known. Like, it was cut off a few years ago when I went through New Zealand just after the big earthquakes in Christchurch, so I wasn't able to see it then, and I was this time, so it was really cool.
It wasn't the Christchurch earthquake, it was the Kaikoura earthquake.
Oh yeah, sorry, my mistake.
That's it. So have you spent much time in the South Island before, Hayley, when you were having your times in New Zealand?
No, the first time I went to Christchurch on a work trip, but I don't think that counts. But we had gone to Queenstown together the year before during winter, and it was absolutely magical. We didn't actually go skiing or snowboarding, but we did do a self-guided winery bike tour around the Gibson Valley. And what else did we do? We went up to the Sky restaurant and had the buffet. We made disgusting pigs of ourselves. And what else? Oh, we went jet boating.
So Queenstown is really one of those places that is a must-see in the South Island.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as far as van life goes, a lot of people would be either sitting here thinking, yeah, that's a really cool thing to do, and others will be thinking that's not for me. So let's focus on the people that think it's really cool. What were some of the first impressions you had of those first few nights of living in a van?
I would say just the absolute freedom. You live so simply, and so your time is not taken up by the mundane trappings of normal life. Dinner takes about 20 minutes and then you quickly wash up, and you're not sitting inside because there's nowhere to sit inside unless you want to be cramped up. So you're outside all the time, you are part of nature, and you wake up to the sunrise. You go to bed when the sun sets because there's nothing else to do with no electricity, and you can drive anywhere, and New Zealand makes it so easy to park anywhere, and you wake up in prime real estate. Even just talking about it makes me go back to that way of life.
So was it really an opportunity where you both kind of started to chill out as people? Did you find that your own soul was starting to be released in this sense of freedom and slowing down, particularly coming from the corporate jobs and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me especially, I'm not one to really like to sit down and read a book and go swimming or anything for a few days in a row, but we really spent a lot of time in Lake Taupo, and that was sort of our routine. We would get up in the morning and go to Spa Park, and then we would have breakfast, and then we'd just go by the lake and swim and read and just really chill out. Like, that is a a typical New Zealand thing just to chill, bro. But this, it was really that lifestyle that you could just relax and settle down and just take everything in as it went by.
Yeah, nature gives you everything in New Zealand, and so it is the perfect opportunity to just stop and embrace that. And you don't have to worry about how you look or how you dress. You just embrace nature.
How did this life transition start to impact your relationship?
That's a good question. I think, especially van life, you are literally stuck in a box with each other for a long time. So we hadn't been together really that long before we started this trip, and it was a quite
Although we were
intense period.
engaged.
That's true. We got engaged quite quickly though, so um, but I think it's really strengthened it. I think when you're going through challenges and decision making every single day while you're traveling, you really get to know what each other like and what's the best way to approach each other as far as communication goes as well. Like in everyday life, you're doing mundane things and you have a very regiment routine, so you're not making as big a decisions every single day. Like you might make them every so often about certain events or certain things coming up, but to go, okay, well, where are we going to go today? And oh, what should we have to eat? And this decisions all day long, every day. And then the challenges that come with that as well,
The
really.
unfamiliarity of travel, you have 10 times the amount of challenges thrown at you each day while you're traveling compared to at home where everything is familiar. And so we have to cope with them in real time together and be aware of each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses. And it's you have to have effective communication. And yeah, we do spend basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week together. It's quite fortunate that we like each other's company.
Yeah, I was going to say that, potentially it could go the other way, couldn't it? And
Yeah.
it could be a bit of a disaster. And I guess in some ways, I guess it's a really good test of a relationship.
Yes. Well, I mean, the ring was already on my finger, so there was no escaping. But absolutely, I can see how people wouldn't thrive in this baptism of fire.
What do you think some of the first, I don't like dwelling on the negatives, but so I'll call it a mistake and a learning curve, I guess. What were some of the learning curves you had from that first experience of living in a van in New Zealand, about travelling the world in general and how to go about it? What were some of the things that came out of that for you guys?
I think the biggest thing for me was looking back at the trip. We probably packed up and drove too much. Like we made a decision when we were in the North Island to go see Cape Reinga, which is the very northern tip of the North Island. And that trip really took up a lot of time, just the driving, and it probably didn't really give us the memories or the experience that we thought it would. So I think really understanding what you want out of the trip beforehand to then make better decisions while you're on the trip, because we just sort of made the decision to go see it for the sake of seeing it without actually going, okay, well, why do we actually want to see this place? Because we're either going to do this or go back to Lake Taupo, which was one of our favorite places in New Zealand. So I think just knowing what you really want out of the trip and then focusing on that rather than just doing things for the sake of it was one of the lessons we learned.
Mm.
So do you think your overall planning process, and I spoke earlier about this budget thing, and I said that lightheartedly, of course, because budgeting is, as you found out, is quite important in terms of the whole travel scenario. So do you think one should plan as much as they can for these types of trips, or do you think there's a happy median somewhere in the middle there?
Definitely do not plan as much as you can for the trips. As much as I do like to plan and even create an itinerary for places, I love that our plans were open ended and so many opportunities came up along the way that we took, and we wouldn't even have dreamed that they existed before we left. So I think it's just a matter of knowing what your values are that will drive your movements, and also knowing what your constraints are. So realizing that you have an upper limit of spending, and that's where budgeting comes in. And also knowing that every time you move around, it costs money, it takes energy, it takes time. So know exactly what you want to get out of a place. And if you don't think that a destination will fulfill your values, then it's okay to say no, even though blogs and other travelers and Instagram are telling you it's a must see destination. If it doesn't align with what ultimately makes you happy, then it's not going to have a good impact on your trip.
I like that, because not every place is for everyone,
Yeah.
and people also see the same place in a different light. So I think that's a good piece of advice. Now, you both say online that you're living intentionally and sustainably. Can you share with my audience what you actually mean by that?
Well, it's going back to those values. It's making a decision not based on other people's influence. It's really about what you find most valuable and seeking that out. And then the sustainable part, we really are thinking critically about our impact while we're traveling, or even in our life back home. We were trying to do this as well and limit our impact through taking reusables with us. And it just takes that extra little bit of effort to think about what your impact is going to be by doing a certain activity and trying to minimize that or make it impact that area better. Like taking a tour, will you go with the big company, or will you try and seek out a local and make sure that the money is going to benefit them in a way, rather than going on a tour that may exploit an area, things like that.
Yeah, we want to live in a way that is good for the planet and it's good for other people, especially when you go to these other communities and it's their home. And as a tourist, we don't want to exploit them. We want to give them the benefit of our tourist dollar, but also we want to have that cultural exchange and get to know locals and delve into new cultures, because that expands our mind and that's what helps the world develop sustainably. And then when the living intentionally comes into it, I guess that's the benefit you get as a traveler, and we're going to take these principles into our lives once we get home, and it's about learning about ourselves and what makes us happy and what our values are, and what's most important to us in life, and I guess just trying to develop as people and then sharing those lessons with other people.
So is this a notion that started when you started this trip, or is it values that you were living by before you commenced this journey?
Well, we definitely had sustainability in mind before we left. We had already started an Instagram page that we were sharing tips and tricks and our journey to live a more sustainable life at home. And then when we decided to go traveling, we wanted to bring that part of us with us and try and do this trip as sustainable as possible. And the challenges that come with traveling and being sustainable are, it makes it much harder, especially in some of the poorer countries where you don't have access to the things we would at home. And I think the intentional part has sort of come along as part of the trip for me anyway. I'm not sure about Hayley, but like our decisions in the beginning and how our values together weren't aligned, as Hayley said previously, and then actually talking about what makes us happy and trying to get on the same page really helped me live more intentionally and make sure that we were making decisions that were making ourselves happy as individuals, but also happy as a couple as well.
What would you say to that, Hayley?
I think we are naturally people inclined to be the best we can, and that was actually something that drew me to Chris when we first started dating. And it's probably transformed just from, okay, being mindful about the food we put in our body or how we exercise, or just being a good person, to being mindful about everything in our lives. I think having this opportunity of travel away from real life and where we are in control of everything rather than being swept up in the pressures of being back home, it's given us a chance to focus more on it. So it has been exacerbated on the trip.
That's cool. And you both believe it's something that you can now build upon for the rest of your lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we could ever go back to not trying to live sustainably because our eyes have been opened to the impact that we as individuals have on the planet. And as time goes on, like in Australia right now, we're in the grip of a climate crisis with the bushfires. So it is coming down to individuals to demand action from our leaders. We we can't go back to how we used to live where we were not mindful at all of our impact on the planet or how other people might be exploited by our actions.
Let's refer that particular statement to your time in New Zealand. Do you think it's possible to live a more intentionally and sustainable life in a country like New Zealand?
Yeah, we actually talk about this quite a lot how New Zealand, especially with Jacinda Ardern and the bill that they passed for the zero carbon by 2050, they are so progressive. But even just the people who live there are so connected to nature that I think they are, as a whole, more environmentally minded. And there are systems in place and an attitude in place where people care about the planet.
Yeah, I think comparing New Zealand to everywhere else I've been in the world, and I particularly remember not an incident, but we were hiking through Abel Tasman and there was a pretty big fire ban at the time. They were quite worried about bushfires in that area. And I remember walking past the local lady and she was stopping everyone along the way to remind them about the fire ban, and even things like smoking on the trail was banned at the time. So she was really passionate about making sure that this area was protected. And she didn't have to do that as anyone in power. She was just someone who really understands what impact an individual can make on an area. And I think that comes with being in nature and being so connected to nature like they are in New Zealand.
Chris, you're doing a very good job today, mate, in promoting my country. So you're almost at the stage where I'm going to send you an All Black jersey to wear for the rest of your global travel. So if you keep up the good work on that, you'll get that. Now I'm going to read you 6 words, you guys, and they're going to be 6 words that I think you can resonate with. Comparison is the thief of joy. Tell me about your thoughts around that.
Oh, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think when it comes down to travel, well, let's take Instagram for example. You see all of these travel bloggers and they have these amazing pictures of glorious places that you could go in the world. And sometimes the reality doesn't actually match up to that. And if you put all of your efforts into trying to achieve what someone else is doing, then you're detracting away from what is going to make you really happy. So I think stop thinking about so much what other people are doing. Stop comparing yourself because we're all different and just focus on what makes you truly happy.
Chris, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I think Instagram is definitely a big influence in that. We've spoken about that a lot recently because that was definitely a platform we've been using for a long time, and we're losing the joy within that, and I think that has a lot to do with it. But also, while traveling, you're having experiences all the time that you can't compare to others, but you do try, and I think that can come back to just going to see a place for the sake of it because you've seen someone else have a really good experience. And you may be surprised when you are traveling the types of experiences you're having in places that people aren't having that same experience as you. And that can be quite confronting because you think, okay, well, if I go to Machu Picchu, which is supposed to be one of the must see destinations in the world, I'm going to have this experience. And then when you actually get there, you may not have it. And then you may beat yourself up and you may think something's wrong with you. And then you may even start trying to justify that experience to other people and say, oh, I had a really good time, but actually you maybe didn't, and you're not truthful in that way either.
Yeah, that's really good. I think also, and Hayley, I'd probably like to ask you this because you've done some travelling before you met Chris, and now that you're travelling as a couple, how has travelling different been for you, doing it with Chris versus doing it by yourself?
Mm. The travel that I had done in the past was mostly actually moving to a country. And that way, I think that suits me well because you create a nest and then you can go have small jaunts where you explore and then come back home to comfort and you can reset. Whereas I've found traveling with Chris, maybe because he's so adventurous, maybe because he's a man and he doesn't have the same pressures that I have as a woman, or maybe it's just the type of people we are. But Chris, he was wanting to travel really fast because he did want to absorb so much of the world as possible. And that was something that I struggled with because I actually felt like how fast we were traveling and how little meaning we were getting from each place because we were only there for such a short amount of time. It was depleting me as a person. And so it has been an effort for us to realize that having a nest or having a home like we do here in Bulgaria now, it's really nice, and you can reset, and then you can go have shorter travel experiences where you explore and throw yourself into that situation, but then you get to come back and rejuvenate. I think the constant moving on the go backpacking is maybe not for me.
A lot of people will be sitting here thinking, okay, how are these two actually doing this? So how are you making this travel process at the moment sustainable? Is it through savings that you saved up, or are you actually making some money on the road today to be able to keep this going?
Yeah, well, we back at home we made the decision to come traveling, and a part of that was giving up our house dream. I guess we were looking at buying a house, so we're doing a lot of saving and being very diligent with that. And when we decided to go on this trip, it was really we were going to spend that money, and that's what we have done. So at the moment, we are still striving to make money, and we are doing everything we can to do that. At the moment, we are not making money, so our trip is not sustainable, and we are coming home next month. But I think in the future, we will be coming back traveling, and we will be making money by then. And I think it is a process. I think when you look at a lot of these digital nomads, and we've done both ways. We've tried to do it in a way where we traveled fast and seen the world, and tried to do the travel vlogs and things like that. And you don't realize the amount of work you have to do while traveling to then make that sustainable. It's not about using your laptop by the pool or at the beach and that's how you make money. It's a real slog. You have to get up every morning, do work, and then you may be able to go out on the weekend to have a look at some things around the city. But like Hayley was saying, the difference now that we understand by doing this trip is we need a base. We need to be in a place for longer than a couple of days to make our business sustainable in the future. And that is one of the biggest lessons we've learnt from this trip, having done both the backpacking fast through South America type travel and then the slow travel through Europe. And the comparison between those, we really understand now what it takes to run a business online and remotely.
I like what I hear from you both, because I've only been doing my podcast show now for about 4 months, and in that time I've interviewed, you're my 78th guest today in 4 months, and in that time I've spoken to a lot of global travellers who are either digital nomads or they're finding other ways and means to get around the world. One of the things that's becoming very apparent is there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And for instance, I had a lady on not so long ago, and she's been house sitting around the world for 9 years, where she doesn't have any accommodation costs whatsoever. She goes and stays in quite palatial surroundings nowadays, from people that she's been house sitting for. Have you considered something like that as an alternative for you to be able to keep this going?
Yes, we're actually going to be house sitting once we get back to Brisbane. And it comes partly out of necessity because we don't want to go back to corporate jobs and you need an income to be able to sign a rental contract. But also it suits us because we don't want to be tied to a place straight away. We still want to travel in the future. And so to have that freedom and flexibility from house sitting is perfect for us. And also having traveled for a year by that time, we'll have run out of money, and so it'll be nice not to have to pay for accommodation. But we've also done Workaway and couch surfing around the world, and they are amazing platforms, not just to save on travel costs, but to have experiences that you normally wouldn't as a tourist, and also to get to know locals.
Yeah, right. Now, Echo Lust Life is your online platform, and you've been working busily getting that up and running and building a community. What's the downside now of putting a little bit of a postponement on this and coming back to Australia as far as the community you've engaged on travelling around the world? Do you see a downside to that?
That's a really good point. And the first season of our Ecoless podcast has been about sustainable travel, but it's not a travel guide per se. It's about taking the values and principles of how you want to live your life and applying it to whatever situation you're in. So we care about being intentional and living sustainably. And sure, we have applied that to our year of traveling the world, but we can also apply that to whatever our lifestyle is, and our audience can apply that to whatever their lifestyle is.
So no matter where you are, you can still keep communicating that same solid message.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, cool. Chris, I'm fairly renowned for throwing very left field questions at my guests, so here comes your one. What's your favourite snack food when you're travelling?
That is a good question. I think my favourite snack food, I have a very large sweet tooth. I have one tooth in my mouth and it is very sweet. And I think we call them back home squirms or sour worms. They're like a soft lolly with a sour sugar coating on them. And if I buy a packet of these, the whole packet is going in one sitting.
That's pretty impressive, mate. Have you been able to find these outside of Australia?
Sometimes. It's one of the things I miss the most, apart from Pix peanut butter, which I'm sure you're aware of because it's a New Zealand brand. It's one of my favourite foods on the world too. But soft lollies in particular, or the good quality kind, are hard to find around the world, and nothing compares to the natural how do you say it? Natural confectionery squirms back home.
Hayley, what's yours?
Oh, Chris calls it Hayley's bits. It's like a platter of different food, like cheese and crackers and carrot and apple and olives and nuts and just little things, like snacky things that go together.
So you're the healthy
Yeah.
one out of the two. Very good. Over your last 11 months of travel, what are some of the funniest things that have happened to you both as a couple?
Well, I guess the funniest things always come down to incontinence, like when you're in a country where the water doesn't particularly agree with your gut and you have to deal with that in a social situation.
Yeah, I think we've both been in that boat.
A few too many times.
Yeah, and one of mine was when I was trekking to Machu Picchu, and I had an emergency while on the trail and didn't have any toilet paper, so I had to dispose of my undies in a not so good way. So I think they are definitely the stories, and it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but Hayley had a similar situation in the Galapagos Islands. Do you want to tell that story? That's probably funnier than mine.
Well, I kind of had to run home, and we were staying in a hostel, and I unlocked our room door and realized that I had actually run into someone else's room, and I had this moment of deciding whether I used their toilet or not.
And what decision did you make, Hayley?
I was a very responsible traveller, and I made it back to our toilet.
Well, it sounds like when you get home, you better go and speak to Mr. and Mrs. Bonds and see if you can get sponsorship from them.
Yeah.
They might be able to help you out. What are some of the most memorable places that you've been to? Obviously, New Zealand's at the top of the list. We don't need to go over that anymore. But what are some of the other places that have really blown your socks off as far as, expectation before you got here and, exceeded expectation of travelling to that particular country?
Galapagos Islands, absolutely. Just being able to experience the wildlife in their natural habitat, and they're so friendly, and like swimming in the deepest, bluest water surrounded by playful sea lions, and then a group of sea turtles swims past you, and sitting on the beach watching the sun go down and having the sea lions just sunbaking on the sand next to you. That's really incredible.
What about for you, Chris?
Yeah, I think the Galapagos is definitely up there for me as well. Like, it's not often that you get a place that lives up to the hype and exceeds it exponentially. But every time I get asked this question, I always get in trouble because we did get married on this trip. So
Oh, yeah.
I think, yeah, in Sucre, Bolivia, like Bolivia wasn't really a blip on our radar before we left, and I had no expectations of the place when we got there, and we ended up staying in Sucre for probably 2 weeks longer than we had thought of initially, and yeah, we ended up getting married there quite quickly. So I think that was definitely an amazing experience for me on this trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great. So how do you choose your destinations? What do you sit down around a map of the world and decide where you want to go, or are there already predetermined destinations that you both wanted to go to?
We definitely wanted to go to New Zealand, and I think I predetermined those destinations because I know the country well. And then Chris was in charge of South America, and so he had done a lot of travel research, and that determined the fact that we went to a lot of places and were traveling quickly. And then after I got quite sick, we decided to slow down, and so we chose Canada because we had friends there, London because it was on our way to Cyprus where we were doing our yoga teacher training, and then Italy for friends, and then Bulgaria because it's a digital nomad hotspot. And I guess that comes down to, or comes back to, traveling with purpose and going to a place because it has meaning for you, not just because it's a tourist hotspot.
What are some of the things you've learnt from these other digital nomads that you've bumped into around the world?
I think I'm in awe of the work that people put in, and the adaptability as well. I think when you go to a new country and you see that someone's actually working there, you can be quite confused on how they're making it work or what they're actually doing. Like, I think the types of jobs that people are doing online, apart from digital media like we're doing with videos and things, and even though that is more creative than anything that I've done in my working life, but there's a few unique jobs that I've seen people doing. Like, we met a Brazilian couple who have been a digital nomad for a long time, and they use Workaway as their base, but then they help other Brazilians become citizens in Italy. So these really niche jobs they're doing, and the creativity and the thought process in creating a business out of a skill they've found in their life is probably the thing I'm in awe of these people.
Yeah, it comes back to these. Um, First of all, like, I'm really inspired by people's bravery to step away from the type of life that the world tells you is safe, or um, the the job that you've fallen into as an adult, to step away from that and realize that's not what is making me happy, and then to create this entirely new livelihood based on what are probably new skills, and then having to market it themselves and be completely independent and responsible for your livelihood, and then to do that in a foreign destination and form a life there. Yeah, I admire people's bravery.
Yeah, and we must say too, there's a lot of people out there doing this. We're not just talking about a handful of people. This is really starting to be, I don't know whether I should use the word epidemic, but there's a tsunami of people who have chosen this path. You know, yourselves, who have used your life savings that was going to go into a house, which is the most, bricks and mortar foundation that you can have in your life, to decide to go and use that money for travel. That's a very brave and courageous decision. And I go back to what you said earlier, Hayley, about having to do that hard sell to your parents. I can only imagine when you told them that you were going to use that money you had aside for that to go travelling, it would have been a very difficult conversation.
Yeah, they were heartbroken.
But at least you've come out the other side, and you are now living true to yourselves, and you're doing what you feel right's for you at this time of your lives, which is fantastic. I applaud you for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we really feel that we are doing that, and it just makes such a difference to your happiness level. Like, I can't imagine going back to a job now where I am not in control of my life and in control of what I'm doing every single day.
So I'm not.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Hayley.
You can live with freedom. You just have to minimize your life. When you live at home, there are so many obligations and pressures and commitments. And even for us, planning to move home in December, I'm already thinking of the things we'll actually need to buy just to live that life, just to be able to go and see our friends or just to be able to, I don't know, go out to a restaurant in Brisbane. It's different when you're traveling. Uh, yeah, it's you you can be free, but you just have to take away the trappings of a normal life back home.
And I don't think we should confuse this with a lack of happiness as a result of having to take away those trappings. I think in terms of there are so many other elements of happiness that result from living that kind of life. You talked about it today, about how you were in New Zealand and you went to bed with the sunset and you rose up with the sunrise, and that's the most beautiful time of the day, and not a lot of people get to see that or enjoy it because they're in that rut of going to do the 9 to 5 and they're sitting on a train or in their car or whatever. So I guess it comes back to that freedom, doesn't it? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been an adjustment for me to realize that the things that matter to me aren't material, or they aren't the goals that everyone else has in the world. It wasn't just I wake up one day, I go traveling, and suddenly I'm free and unmaterialistic. It's a process. But I do think that by stripping your life down to its bare essentials that make you happy, that does make you happier rather than the sacrifice that also comes with it.
I'd like to ask you both, has there been a sense of increased spirituality in your life since you've been doing this kind of thing? And I don't use the word spirituality in any kind of religious sense. I make it in the sense of, enlightenment in life, personal growth, self-awareness, mindfulness, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, especially like I was saying before, I'm usually one to be go, go, go and achieving, and I can't sit down for longer than 10 minutes just to read a book or take time for myself. I really used to be in the mindset of I need external things to make me happy and I need to be doing something that fulfills my life. But being on this trip and, like you said, stripping away all of your life possessions, you actually create room for other things. And I think that's the biggest lesson. And this comes a little bit from our yoga teacher in Cyprus, that by creating space within yourself and within your life, you actually give yourself room to take in the things that make you happy. So I think for me, that's definitely been a big lesson on this trip.
And we now do yoga every day and we try to meditate. We're not very good at it, but something I'm loving lately is journaling each morning, and that's a really beneficial mindfulness practice for me. Yeah, we're not religious people, but we are trying to have those, as you would say, spiritual practices that connect ourselves either with, depending on your terminology, like God or your soul or something like that.
And it's all okay for it to be whatever it means to you. I think it's another one of those things that we don't have to label as a community. It's something that it feels right for you, then you do it, and nobody else has to give you permission to do so. Yeah. I can't let you guys go today without talking about the weekly budget meetings. So how did that all come about? Like, someone listening is going to go, what's this about? Like, sitting down having a boardroom meeting about budget every week, or what's going on? How did that come about?
It's funny you say boardroom meeting, because Hayley actually takes minutes and we discuss the minutes from the previous week. So for me, I'm a tradie from back in the day. So having a toolbox meeting meant, standing around and talking. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but
Rubbish.
Talking rubbish basically. And having something so organized and set out is quite different for me, but it does really benefit us, especially when you're sharing money. It really helps in looking at what we're spending our money on, and then looking at what our budget actually is, and if we're going too far in one direction and trying to bring it back. So I think it's always about balance with budget. You're assessing what you've been spending your money on, and we don't try and restrict ourselves too much, but we are just mindful of looking at that honestly. And I think that can be hard for people, is actually looking at what they're spending their money on, and actually, does that benefit their life? And then if it doesn't, cutting it out or reducing it so you can spend the money on things that actually mean something to you and benefit your life.
Yeah, I do have to tie Chris's ankles and wrists together sometimes to make him sit still and have these conversations. But you do see benefit in them eventually. But we've just created a simple spreadsheet where we work out, okay, what are our committed expenses, like upcoming accommodation we've booked, or upcoming flights we need to pay for, and even the bills that come out of our bank account from back home. Work out where we are committed in our spending, and then the money that we have, what we can do with the remainder of that. And when we're making plans, working out if those plans do fit into that budget, because we did go a long time just making any plans that we wanted, and each individual plan or each individual purchase was the budget option in itself. But when you combine them all together, it did add up and eat a large chunk of our money. So budgeting is a really important aspect to the sustainability of our trip.
Yeah, right. So, Chris, you can take the girl out of the corporate life, but you can't take the corporate life out of the girl, right?
That's exactly right.
Now, you guys have just recently started your own podcast journey. You've got a great podcast show. I want to also give you a lot of inspiration and gratitude for that. It's a brilliant show. You do very well together. Keep it going. It's a hard road, this podcasting world. It's a really exciting one, though. It's very interesting. You meet a lot of amazing people along the way, like I am with you two today. So I'm going to put all the links to your different online platforms in the show notes of this podcast today, so we can share Echo Lust Life with everybody around the world in over 80 countries we're going to at the moment. So I wish you really well on that particular journey. Anything that you'd like to end the show with today that would inspire someone to get off the couch and go traveling and to change their lives, what would you say to them right now?
I think the biggest thing for me from this trip is the risk is not doing it. The risk is learning later in life that you had this opportunity that you have right now to do something that you really want to with your life, and waking up one day and going, oh, I wish I really did that, and I've really taken this trip on board as that in my life, that I didn't want to wake up one day and resent the decision I made not to do this trip. And that is really important for yourself. Like, there's nothing worse than resenting any decision you make previously, and really just being brave and courageous to do it.
Hayley, what about you?
I think everything you do comes at a cost in terms of money and energy and time. And so sit down and work out what it is that you really want and what makes you happy and what impact you want to have. And that will dictate not only your travel style and your travel plans, but anything in your life. And maybe you even decide travel is not for you, and that's fine. And because it's intentional, that's what's good
Brilliant.
For you.
I don't think we could finish the show on a better note than sharing that inspiration. Now, the show's been dedicated to Grace today, who's about to have a young baby. And Grace, all the best with your young child. I hope it's great, but I hope you also listen to this podcast show and hear how your two friends have done a great job on the Global Travel Channel today. Chris and Hayley, thanks very much for joining me from Bulgaria. It's been fantastic chatting to you both. I wish you all the very best for the future, and I'd love to have you back on the show a little bit later on. You can keep us up to date with where you're going in life.
Yeah, we'd love to. We've had a really good chat with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Mark.
Okay, we'll speak again.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Bye.
There we are. What a brilliant couple. That's Chris Minehan and Hayley Tillard from Australia, who are currently travelling the world after using the money that they saved up to buy their first home together. Now, that's brave and courageous, but look at the fantastic time they're happening and look how they're changing their lives. So fantastic. Hats off to them both, and great to have them both on the show. If you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel, head over to the website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. You'll find all of our episodes there. You can also download them from Apple iTunes, from Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and a host of other locations, which are all listed there on the website. Now, don't forget, if you love our content, please share it with your friends, family, and work colleagues. The more people we can have listening to the Global Travel Channel around the world, the better. So we'd really appreciate that. Okay, that's it for this episode. I'm really looking forward to coming back and doing another one for you all. In the meantime, my name's Mark Philpott. Until we meet again, I wish you all bon voyage.